Guys, it's D-Rig with another remote control airplane video. Today we're gonna be repairing my 70cc Peregrine from Extreme Flight. The problem is that wing tube sleeve right there has a crack in it because my dumbass had the exhaust can touching it, and you could see the mark right about there. The wing tube itself is also cracked. That's easy enough to fix. I'll just order a new one on the internet. But it's not so easy to fix or replace that sleeve. So I'm going to patch it with fiberglass, and that's going to be the subject for today. Now first, I've gathered the materials I'm going to use today. Obviously I'm going to need some fiberglass. I've pre-cut 3 pieces I'm going to lay up to make a nice strong repair. I've got some rubber gloves because we're going to be dealing with epoxy. I have some 30-minute 2-part epoxy to give myself lots of time to get the patches in place. I've got some rubbing alcohol 100% to mix in with the epoxy to make it nice and thin so it can saturate these pieces thoroughly without gobbing up, and you want a nice smooth surface to make a strong bond. I've got a mixing popsicle stick and an acid brush to to paint the epoxy onto the pieces, and of course I got a cup to mix the epoxy and the alcohol, rubbing alcohol, together. Next, I'm going to mix my 2-part 30-minute epoxy together along with some rubbing alcohol to make it nice and thin. Now the key here, if you've never mixed epoxy before, which I'm sure most of you watching this video have, is to make sure it's 2 equal parts. A little bit goes a long way because that little bit is going to be doubled here in a second. Now the bottle of epoxy I buy have these graduated marks so you can kind of see to make sure it's equal. You just need to use your best judgment. The last little piece here when you're doing fiberglass is to put just a little bit of rubbing alcohol. It doesn't take very much. You can measure these things out, but using best judgment, in my opinion, is good enough for a remote control airplane. So we'll mix thoroughly with the popsicle stick, and the next thing we'll do after this is get our pieces of fiberglass in position once we have our rubber gloves on, of course. Probably use the popsicle stick to help us out a little bit here. So make sure we get it nice and mixed up. Also, word of caution, I've had this happen before when mixing a lot of epoxy in a solo cup like this. There's a heat reaction, and it will ruin the epoxy if it gets too hot. So this solo cup's for using or for mixing a small amount of epoxy, not too much. This amount is just fine. So now I'm going to place my fiberglass patch kind of in its spot there. I'm going to get my nice and mixed epoxy with the rubbing alcohol, my acid brush, and I like to kind of grab them like this to get the bristles that are loose out so they don't end up in my repair. And I'm just going to start in the middle, and I just want to dab it real quick because I don't want it to move. Then once it starts kind of laying down where I want it, kind of like so, and I could use the acid brush to move around the patch as I need. You can see it, because I put that rubbing alcohol, it starts spreading through the patch itself. You don't need to overdo the application of the epoxy. Like I said, a little bit goes a long way. So I'm just kind of laying the brush on there so that it soaks up the epoxy. Don't need to worry about those strands, that happens. But I want the patch to be placed mostly over that crack if I can. So I'm using the brush to move it around. And you can see there's still a dry corner. So you have to get the patch completely saturated so that it lays down. Sometimes you gotta fight with it. You gotta get the popsicle stick. So just be ready with rubber gloves and tools. It's, you know, the best thing here is to be prepared. Hopefully you guys can see what I'm doing here. I'm just moving the fiberglass patch to where exactly I want it. And then I'll use the brush to get some more epoxy on the dry corners there. There we go. That's just what I wanted. And you can also see I put a bunch of masking tape because nobody likes getting a bunch of epoxy everywhere that it doesn't belong. So if it gets on the masking tape, no big deal. I'll just peel it out when I'm done with this process. It's all about prep work. So when you get to this point, you're not scrambling because now we're on a timer, that 30-minute timer for the epoxy. Okay, so the first patch is in position. I'm going to go ahead and get the second patch. It's a little smaller than the first patch. Now, there's a lot of epoxy on that already, so I don't expect to need to paint very much on there. Alright, there it is. The repair is complete. All 3 layers of fiberglass are on. The epoxy is curing. I have the cup where I mix the epoxy. I like to keep it around just so I can see what the status of the epoxy job is, so I'll leave this on my workbench. I'm not going to do anything more with this airplane today. I'm going to let it cure. It takes several hours, especially when you put the rubbing alcohol in it. I think it makes it take a little longer. But I have this heat shielding, so hopefully I won't repeat this mistake. I'm going to put a little chunk over that wing tube sleeve before I push the exhaust can back over that area. Anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.